Welcome to Fantasy Fanline.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week of Fantasy Fanline, the only fantasy football call-in show putting you live on the air with industry experts each and every week. I'm your host, Greg Scalera. If you've joined us before, you know that we feature different guests from around the fantasy football industry every week to take your calls and answer your questions live on the air, and today is no different. You can call into the show anytime at 618-FANLINE. To talk some fantasy football with us live on the air. You can bring your questions, your comments, you can join the conversation, weigh in on the topics that we're discussing. If you think we're wrong, call us out. If you think you're right, call in, give us some props. We're live right now and every Saturday, all season long at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can catch us on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Twitch. Anywhere you want us, you got us. So please subscribe, hit the bell so you're the first to know when we're on the air every Saturday. Each episode is also available in audio format the following day wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow us on all platforms at Fantasy Fanline and visit our website, fantasyfanline.com, for a full schedule of our upcoming guests and to submit a question to our mailbag if you can't join us live. We got some great mailbag questions that we'll be getting into today, so if between today and next Saturday that you want to hear your questions on next weekend's episode, check it out over on fantasyfanline.com, write in, and we will get it and talk about it live on air. If you like what you hear today, please leave a review, tell a friend to tune in. We are a brand new independent show, and we are counting on you to help us grow. So without further ado, I am so excited to bring in this week's guest. He is Santiago Casanova of BRoto Fantasy Football. Santiago, welcome to the show, buddy.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, I muted you for the intro, and then I didn't unmute you when I brought you in. I completely set you up for failure there. How are you today, man?
I'm doing great, very excited. I like the idea for the show, so it's exciting to be here.
Thank you. Dude, I say every week on this show that I am a fan of everybody that I bring onto this show because I feel like if I'm not giving information to the listeners that I subscribe to myself, it doesn't feel right. And it goes to the fullest extent bringing you on this show. Man, I actually found you through a Reddit post in the offseason. I don't know if I told you this.
No, I don't know.
I went on Reddit to ask around a little bit about up-and-coming new voices in the industry, who I should be aware of, who should I be checking out, who's putting out good content. And you specifically were recommended to me, which is the funny part. It was your name, actually, not BRoto, and I found BRoto through you. I don't know if that was you answering my Reddit post.
I don't use Reddit for fantasy football, so no.
Well, there you go. Somewhere out there on Reddit, you have a fan. And
that's very cool.
My first impression, man, when I read that post and I researched you, well, obviously my first impression was, that is the best name I've ever heard in fantasy football. And I told myself not to bring that up today because I'm sure you hear it all the time. In fact, I know you hear it all the time because I've watched you on other shows and they always bring it up, but I can't not say it. God, dude, you sound like a superhero. Like, it was impossible for you to grow up and not be, smart and handsome and successful and cool, which you are. Specifically, it sounds like the name that you would like if you grow up with a name like Dick Butkus, like after an entire childhood of being called Dick Butkus, the first time you grow up and leave your home and somebody's like, hey, what's your name, kid? You're like, Dick, no, Santiago Casanova,
There you go. I made it up, actually.
That would make more sense. Boyd is writing in from YouTube saying Cass is a stud on all caps. I agree. Could not agree more. Cass, dude, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do over at BRoto, because it is so interesting.
Sure. I started off as a writer for BRoto a couple years ago, and then I'm currently in school for applied maths. So I started combining both of my worlds of fantasy football and math into one, and developing stats and tools for BRoto, and I became the lead data analyst for BRoto Fantasy. And we've been developing an app this entire season and off season just to put together all our knowledge and stats and everything we've created for fantasy football, and that's what I handle right now.
I love it, man. I maintain that the only cool application of math is fantasy football. So you did it, man. You found the one avenue of success. No, I'm just kidding. Math is great. I have a grudge against it because I'm terrible at it, but I respect its application towards fantasy. I'm not like a week-to-week sports gambler because I have too much respect for the chaos and the variety that can happen on any given Sunday. But I feel like
Yeah.
when you step back and zoom out and look at a season as a whole, which is really what fantasy football is when you're not playing a DFS format, applying math to it really helps you get an edge and be right more often than you are wrong. And when you apply that over a large enough sample size, this is the kind of stuff that gives you an edge and puts you ahead of the margin. Am I right?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, there's math is such a large field that different portions of math can help you for redraft, for dynasty, for DFS. So it really just, you have to analyze which tools and which aspects of math you want to use for each portion. So it's not only for season long or dynasty, you can use it for DFS as well. You know, there are these optimizers which use different types of math, or how Yahoo or ESPN does their projections. So it's just finding ways to integrate what we know into fantasy football.
That's incredible, man. DFS scares the crap out of me. Maybe I'll dip my toe in the water of applied math, and it won't be as intimidating moving forward. But I would love to talk through the app. It's really and you guys describe it as a one-stop shop for all of your fantasy football needs. It really is, man. Like, before I found it this season, thanks to that whoever that was on Reddit, and I'll have to go back and find them and thank them for connecting me with your brand. But I was really going to lots of different places depending on my research needs. I was using a variety of different resources across different websites. It was such a hassle. Every time I wanted to sit down and really dig into a player, I was going to one place for this and I was going to another place for that, and I had to kind of combine it into an aggregate. And really, your app was designed, I feel like, well, why don't you talk us through the process of what you guys kind of had in mind when you built the app and you decided what tools and stats to apply to it, because you could really tell it was built by people who play and live and breathe fantasy football.
Oh yeah, that's definitely true. And it happened like you said, like you go to Pro Football Reference for some stats, then maybe a different website for snap count, a different website for fantasy points, Fantasy Pros, all of this. You have to be switching between apps, websites. Well, actually not even between apps, it's always websites. There's no fantasy football app that is not for playing fantasy football. So we saw this market hole and this need to condense everything into one place. And we just acted on it. So we started first. We only had our podcasts, some basic stats, our articles, and then we started building from there and have now exclusive stats, points tools, start sit tools. So we're adding more and more on top of it until we can make it truly a one-stop shop for fantasy football players.
That's awesome, man. I will say that I found your app prior to draft season this year, and it was the first time that I went to in-person drafts with my phone instead of a laptop. Nice. And it was glorious, man. I don't know, man. It just makes everything easier to have it at your fingertips, and I just want to say to you and your team, thank you for making a resource like that. I can't wait to see how it continues to develop. And I would like to take some time today to talk about maybe some of the unique stats that you guys offer on that app, and really more importantly, how players should be interpreting them and applying them to their decision making, because I feel like that is half the battle. You can lead a horse to water, but you also need to teach them how to drink it. Before we get into that, I do want to note that our phone lines are now open, 618 Fanline. You can pick up your phone, call in and join us anytime during the broadcast today. You will be on air with Santiago and me, and we will talk through your questions. So that's start sit, trade questions, waiver pickups, general fantasy football philosophy questions. We got a couple of those in the mailbag today. So anything you want to discuss with us, we're here for you. But, why don't we take a quick look at the mailbag first? I want to make sure we get to these, and then we'll jump back into the app a little bit. So starting with Anthony in New Jersey, writes into our mailbag at fantasyfanline.com. Is Allen Robinson worth stashing on the bench at this point? I'm going to let you weigh in on that first, and then I'll, as a Bears fan, I will
oh yeah, that's
cautiously offer my opinion.
I mean, I do think it's very league dependent, like most things in fantasy, but this, for me, I would still hold on to him. I mean, just gotta make the switch that he's not the Allen Robinson of old. You just gotta forget that his name is Allen Robinson and treat him for what he is, which is a wide receiver 3. But still a valuable wide receiver 3, because if you look at players that you might drop Allen Robinson for, and other different players in that same tier, wide receiver 3 tier, they don't have the same upside that Allen Robinson does. So why would you drop a player for an equal replacement with less upside? That's the way I see it. If you're looking at to replace him with someone at the same level, don't, because I still believe that he has that little bit of juice left in him.
It's so hard because when you say he's not the Allen Robinson of old, this isn't like saying he's not the Odell Beckham Jr. of old, who was relevant, 4 or 5 years ago. A-Rob was a wide receiver one the last 3 years straight.
Yeah.
So like, it's not that old. It looks like a completely different situation with him. And he's on the same team that he's been on. He's still in Chicago, catching passes from a different quarterback, but he's done much better with much worse quarterbacks in the past, right? He came out, lit the league on fire with Blake Bortles in his rookie year. So, let's play a little name game. When you say that there's not a lot of guys out there that you would drop him for, would you drop him for Brandon Ayuk right now?
Yes, I would.
I think so too, because he's kind of in that same tier for me of guys who we had high hopes for coming into the season, are having a hard time disassociating his current value from his draft season value. Yeah. But I think that we've seen a little more from Ayuk in recent weeks than we have from Robinson. What about like a Hunter Renfrow or Sterling Shepard?
Hunter Renfrow, I probably would, especially now that Rogers is gone. Gone. Sterling Shepard, not so sure, because I don't know what that offense looks like. We've seen a different offense and a different target leader almost every week, so I'm not a big fan of that. Allen Robinson is getting those targets he needs. He's just not doing a lot with those targets, so I'd rather be patient with Allen Robinson than drop him for Sterling Shepard.
Well, I'll give you one more interesting one. Would you drop him for Darnell Mooney?
That is definitely interesting. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, all right.
Because I know I said I wouldn't drop him for guys in the same level without the same upside, but this is different because they're on the same team, so we can compare them kind of apples to apples, and they're getting about the same amount of volume in terms of targets, snap share. They split weeks. Who gets most of the snaps? Who gets most of the targets? And we've seen Mooney do more with what he gets. So in the same situation, I can compare them directly, and I would prefer Mooney.
It is really close in terms of their usage, and I know this by using the Fantasy Football by BRoto app. I actually pulled it up this morning when I was looking at these questions. So Darnell Mooney on the season is seeing an 87.1 snap percentage versus Allen Robinson's 85.5. He's getting a 24.9 target percentage versus Robinson's 21.1. So it's close. Mooney is playing like the 1A right now, and he's earning targets proportionate to it. That's not to say he's a better player than Allen Robinson. He's young. I think that chemistry, and I've said this before in my show, is a real thing between quarterbacks and wide receivers.
For sure. And
sometimes you get guys who just click, and sometimes you get guys who don't, which again goes back to Odell Beckham Jr. Going to Cleveland and being irrelevant with Baker Mayfield after years of dominance with Eli Manning. So sometimes it's just a matter of mixing and matching personnel. And right now we're seeing Mooney and Justin Fields on the same page. I think Fields continues to get better. I think that offense does have upside, but for whatever reason, that system is just not doing any favors for Allen Robinson. So I think
it's bad.
If you're asking, is he worth stashing? Yes, he is worth stashing, but he is not undroppable. I think that if there's really somebody on your free agency pool or your waiver wires who's you're really excited about, you really have a gut feeling about their upside, don't feel like you are obligated to hang on to Allen Robinson just because of what you paid for him in drafts. It is that time of the year when you need to put that behind you and start worrying about value moving forward and who's going to give you the best chance to win the rest of the way. More often than not, I think Allen Robinson is that guy, but sometimes he won't be, so don't feel tethered to him. Good question, Anthony. That actually, Anthony, is somebody who I play in a league with personally, who I happen to know sent in that question. I tried trading low for Allen Robinson in like week 2, and I was trying to get rid of James Robinson, and I packaged him at the time, and I am so glad he rejected that trade.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anthony. That was after the week 1 when it looked like Urban Meyer was just going to be a Carlos Hyde guy. And, sometimes things happen for a reason.
Yeah, that was great.
So we'll keep it rolling with the mailbag from Jerry in Ohio. What is the best tiebreaker method for fantasy playoffs? I love this question. I think it's so interesting because I don't really ever hear anybody talk about it. What do you think based on what you have used in your leagues and your experiences?
For sure. I actually had a brief discussion on Twitter late last season about this, and I'll always be on team points scored. I don't like head-to-head tiebreakers because you have no way of controlling how many points your opponent scores. You only have a way to control your points. That's what should matter for fantasy playoffs and deciding between players for me. That just clear as day for me.
That is such a good reason. I had the same answer, but that line of thinking didn't even occur to me. I love putting it in the hands of the managers and letting them determine their own fates with the things that they can control. My reason for answering overall points was because, I mean, first of all, it gives more opportunity for meaningful results in late season games. You know, if you're tied at the end of the year with somebody who you haven't gone head to head against in 8 weeks, that outcome was determined, you know, a month and a half ago. And it just feels anticlimactic to me. I like it coming down to the wire. I like people having to still set meaningful lineups in week 17, you know? Well, not week 17, but you know what I mean.
This year, yes.
Yeah, the last few weeks of the regular season.
Yeah, I get it.
If I'm seeing that I'm going to end up tied with somebody who beat me, you know, 2 months ago, I'm just going to throw my hands up and duck out early. And I don't think that's the way to play fantasy football.
Agree.
Also, obviously, reduces the chances of a tie because there are managers who you play twice in the season. You could end up with 1 win each, then it just gets messy. Obviously, you could still potentially tie with points scored, but it is much less likely.
Especially with fractional points.
Yes, I am not a applied maths major, but even I could tell you that the odds are pretty remote.
Slim,
so it is a unanimous points for us on that question. Thank you, Jerry in Ohio. You're probably a commissioner trying to figure out, I don't know if you're starting a new league or maybe thinking of making a change, but that is our recommendation. Take one more here before we take a break from the mailbag. Just another reminder to the folks watching at home or wherever you're watching from. I guess you don't have to be watching at home in today's world of technology. 618 Fanline is our number. You can call in and join us on the show, ask a question, just chat, weigh in on some of our takes. In the meantime, we got Nadine from California who wants to know, if Godwin, AB, and Gronk all sit, is there another Bucs wide receiver worth starting? This one came in a few days ago, I think, before some of the news about the Buccaneers players broke. Let me check my notes here. Antonio Brown is ruled out. Gronk is ruled out. Chris Godwin is a game time decision at 1 o'clock versus the Washington football team.
So it's ugly, pretty much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I actually like Tyler Johnson as a flyer this week. We already saw him play the third most snaps and get actually the second most targets last time the Bucs played. And that was when Antonio Brown was also out and Rob Gronkowski was also out. So a similar situation. It's not my favorite option, but like we talked a little bit about DFS at the start of the show. For DFS, he's a very good punt play because he's be very cheap in salary and has a lot of potential because he's been getting the snaps, he's been getting the targets, and that'd be my option. I'm not a big Scotty Miller fan this week.
Yeah, I think Ty Johnson's going to be a popular dart throw in DFS. I love it. He was 5 of 6 for 65 yards in Week 8 versus the Saints. He's seen an uptick in snaps ever since Antonio Brown went out. If you're going to bet, I mean, he's not a surefire. I'm not saying fire him up as a flex or wide receiver 3 over a more reliable option in redraft if you don't have to. But if you are hurting on bye, you have injuries, I think he's a guy that you can throw in and hope for some upside. Scotty Miller's been out since I think week 3 with turf toe. He had some moments of relevance last year in situations where the guys ahead of him went out, but not enough to feel like he's going to come in and demand that role again from last season.
Especially not with turf toe. So his first game back from the IR, not great. And I've seen some Jalen Darden fans around, also not big on him. I think Tyler Johnson is going to get that role and just box everyone else out. No more room for anyone else.
Yep. And for anybody who's wondering whatever happened to Justin Watson, I believe he is out long-term with a knee injury, something like that. I remember seeing weeks ago he was out for like 3 or 4 months. So people thinking back to last season, the great Scotty Miller versus Justin Watson debate of 2020, that debate is no longer relevant. It is now Ty Johnson time. Let's go.
Or Cyril Grayson, if you're into that, but I'm personally not.
That's true, but definitely worth mentioning. So let's take a break from the mailbag here. I would like to talk a little bit more about your app, Santiago, and if you could take a minute to highlight some of those unique stats that you guys have and talk about how they should be applied, because I feel like especially newer players might come into your app and see some of that vocabulary and say, okay, this is great. Now, what do I take away from this, and what action do I take based on the trends that I'm seeing on these stats?
For sure. What we want to do with the app, and I think we've managed pretty good, is have it be for any type of player. So if you're just a beginner player or surface player and you want to get some start sit input, go into the start sit tool, put your 2 players in, you're done. If you want to get a little bit more in depth, we have points over average or defensive points over average, where you can see how defenses perform against fantasy positions over or under average, not just how many points they have allowed, but more what percentage of points do they have as an increase or decrease to positions. For example, one way to interpret is if you see Jets are plus 57%, I'm making these numbers up, by the way, against running backs. That means that running backs on average increase their points per game output by 57% when they play the Jets. It's not just...
Honestly, that sounds about right off the top of my head.
I know the Jets are number one, that they're the worst. They might be even higher, like 90, 80%. I know they were over 100% at some point. So that's gives crazy. You some context to points allowed, because you always see, yes, they allowed the most points against tight ends, but you see who they play, and they play Waller, Mark Andrews, and Travis Kelce in a row. Of course, they're going to give a ton of points. You have to look at how many points over or under average they score.
That figure is a really great tiebreaker. And again, for any newer players who are kind of listening to the show and thinking about, again, how to apply this, that's not to say that you go into the app and you look at that and you see a 10% differential and you're like, oh, well, I'm going to start Michael Carter over, I don't know, an RB1 this week. No, that's to say that if you have 2 guys who are about on the same tier,
exactly,
you kind of look at that to kind of be the coin flip that breaks a decision.
Absolutely.
On the flip side, if you go in and you see a really dramatic number in either direction, maybe that's something that's a legitimate difference maker. If you have a guy who's been really well producing, but you see him going into a tough match where it's a minus 60, 70, then you might give you pause. So
yeah, exactly. That'd be like our second level. And then we have for super deep advanced players that want to look very deep into the stats, and we have exclusive stats like rushing yards over expected, which we calculate first expected rushing yards with machine learning algorithm that takes into account, yards to go, down, distance, time, quarter, all of these variables, and gives you an output. So in this play, the running back's expected to gain 4 yards. He actually gained 5, so he got 1 yard over expected. And that's just like the max level of intricacy you can get from the app. So we have all these different levels for different types of players.
Now, when you look at yards over expected, what do you learn from that about a player? Do you look at that and you say, oh, it's a continuous trend that I can expect to keep up through the rest of the season, that he's going to keep outperforming his expected yards? Or is it to say, oh, he's doing better than expected, I can expect some sort of regression to the mean? How do you look at that figure?
It's a little bit of both. In the app, you can look at expected rushing yards and rushing yards over expected, and they both have value, because expected rushing yards are a sticky metric week to week and year to year, even more so than yards per carry. If you look at yards per carry year to year, they won't hold up. Sometimes players play very well and get easy situations, so they'll average 5.9 yards per carry. Then they get a bad situation, they'll average 3.4. Expected rushing yards maintains a good medium of what to expect from players. So, for example, in the offseason, I used it to project for players. All right, I'm thinking Mixon will get X number of attempts, and I multiply it by the expected rushing yards he had the year prior instead of his yards per carry. And that will give me a more faithful output of how many rushing yards I expect him to get. So that's how you look at expected rushing yards, as a better yards per carry. And then rushing yards for expected is not a predictive metric, more of an evaluation metric. You see how players are doing and kind of compare them compared to players who are in a similar situation to see who's doing more with what they have beyond yards per carry. Because if you have a goal line touch at the 1 yard line, I mean, you're going to have 1 yard per carry if you score. And it is not a bad thing, because you were expected to gain about 1 yard. That's also part of the context that this gives. It's just to give more context to traditional stats.
Great point. That's why you're going to see so many fantasy points for James Conner, but probably such a low, yards per yeah. That's great. And just a little bit of vocabulary note there. When we say a sticky stat in the industry, we mean something that we can expect to continue and that we can use to expect to inform our fantasy value for that player moving forward, correct?
Yes, correct. Something that's going to stay consistent.
Yeah. Okay. A great example of a sticky stat would be targets, and a terrible example of a sticky stat would be touchdowns.
Exactly.
Just a very high level example again for newer players who may not be familiar with some of this stuff.
Yeah, please tell me if I get like too technical. I tend to just dive into my.
You're good, man. That's what we're here for. I know that we have people listening to the show who have been playing for many years, but we also have people listening who are in their first or second season and are here because they want to learn more about the game and maybe dig a little bit deeper. I mean, it's all about giving yourself microscopic edges over the course of a season, right? I played with people who had no idea what they were doing, who beat a league full of people who had been playing for years, because it's a game that relies on luck to some extent. But more often than not, the people making the educated decisions are going to come out on top. And I started this show specifically, Fantasy Fanline, because I feel like conversation around this information is really important to put things in context. I think that there is a lot of value and a time and place for looking at cheat sheets and expert consensus rankings. But if you're not understanding the information that you're consuming, it's worthless. I mean, it's only as valuable as your application of it. So that is why I was really excited to get into some of this applied math stuff today. And one more stat that I really wanted to look at and put into context for our listeners, and let me pull it up here because I thought this was really cool. True target value. Why don't you talk a little bit about that and how you apply it to your opinion of a player's value?
Yeah, this is also something I use sort of a target, as a tiebreaker between tiers, not just as a decision maker outright. Mm-hmm. And the way this is calculated is it's completely agnostic to wide receivers. We first look at the QB and how valuable their throws are. We split them into red zone or not red zone, so throws to the outside, throws to the middle, and then assign an average value for each type of throw. And then we see how many of those throws a specific receiver is seeing. So if you have a player that's getting 5 targets and another player that's getting 5 targets, but player 1 is getting 5 targets in the middle of the field to the outside, it's not going to be the same as a player that gets 5 targets in the red zone to the outside. They are much more valuable. This is the true target value that each player gets, that comes from the type of target they're getting, the number of targets they're getting, and the QB that's throwing those targets. Because also 5 targets from Ryan Tannehill is not the same as 5 targets from Daniel Jones.
I was going to ask if that's factored in.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's
that's
really
awesome.
Depending on the QB. We calculate the average value of a throw for each QB, and we have true throw value in the app that you can check as well, and then extrapolate that to the types and number of targets each receiver gets to get the true target value.
That's incredible, man. And that is a granular distinction point that I have not really seen anybody talk about. You see a lot of people throw around, again, targets as a sticky stat. And yes, it is sticky to some extent, but at some point in some situations, all the targets in the world are not going to amount to anything if they're not valuable targets. And I actually pulled up, I was looking through there this week at some interesting leaders in various metrics that I wanted to call out here and kind of get your take on what it means and whether or not maybe this is somebody to buy low on or sell high on. True target values for wide receivers in 2021. Number 3 on that list is Keenan Allen right now.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
I make of that we've seen that Justin Herbert's throws have been valuable because we've seen it with Mike Williams. Mm-hmm. And recently
who's also on the top 10 list, Mike Williams, by the way.
I mean, you can see where that comes from. But we've seen an uptick in throws to Keenan Allen and value throws and sort of a little bit trend down for Mike Williams as well. So what this tells us is that we can expect very high outputs for Keenan Allen in the future. The way things are trending in terms of target totals and who's throwing them, he is in a prime spot to produce at a high level. And maybe we haven't seen his ceiling so far this season. That's what I interpret.
Yeah, and that's the kind of actionable insight that really makes this tool so valuable, is because you can kind of look at it and see where the differences in expectations diverge from maybe the way that people are valuing this player right now. Keenan Allen is wide receiver number 29 so far in the season, if you can believe it. So if there's a manager in your league who values him that way or anywhere near, back end wide receiver 2 kind of value, and you're looking at him number 3 on your true target value list right now, go make an offer,
That's crazy.
Another guy on that list that I thought was interesting, more towards the bottom of like the 10-12 range, was T. Higgins on the Bengals, surprisingly. Right behind Robert Woods, RIP, who just tore his ACL today.
Man, so sad.
And we'll get into that later, but another couple of things that I wanted to take a look at. Now I'm looking at the consistency lists, and I thought this was really cool too. So basically what you guys have here is an arrangement of aggregated rankings of players who finished as a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, how many times they've done it. Yeah. And that holds true for each position. But I thought it was interesting that Marquise Brown so far is second in the league in wide receiver 1 consistency at 5 games. And I call that out, not because I don't think he's a good player. I think he just has the reputation, because he's a smaller, speedier guy, of being more of a boomer bust player in an offense that doesn't throw much. But that is not the case. He's got 5 weeks as a wide receiver 1 this year, and that just blew my mind when I saw it. I mean, is that something that you expect to continue?
Ooh, that now you're getting into a different topic, like looking at stats from the past and thinking,
I know.
You think this continues? It's a very difficult subject. Personally, I do think he can keep it up. What you said about him being a small, speedy receiver in an offense that doesn't pass much, so we expect him to be more bust. I think that's the Tyler Lockett effect. Mm-hmm. They are in a very similar situations, and we cannot tend to compare them. I do not think they're the same. I think Marquise Brown has more of an alpha role in his offense that allows him to produce more consistently. And I do expect him, maybe not at the same rate as he is right now, but to keep producing at a high level. I definitely do.
Yeah, I love that take. I think that stereotype exists for players of that kind of physical, archetype, because those wide receivers are not usually the alpha target in the offense. Yeah. But we've seen situations, i.e. Tyreek Hill in Kansas City, especially last year, where they can come out and be used consistently and produce consistently. And I think this also kind of goes back to like the Deshaun Jackson years, when he was the epitome of a boomer bust player. I think that people looked at guys like that and guys like Tyler Lockett, and they say, okay, well, the smaller, faster guys will get the occasional big week winning plays, but not necessarily be useful, consistent wide receiver 1s, 2s on your team. And that's not what we're seeing this year with Hollywood Brown. I love it.
Yeah, no, not at all.
A couple more we'll call out, and then we'll get back to the mailbag, because this is so much fun for me. I think this stuff is so cool. Similarly, on the consistency chart for leading wide receiver 2s, Stephon Diggs is on there, which you don't love to see if you drafted him as a 1, but Christian Kirk and AJ Green both on that list at 4 and 3 weeks respectively. A lot of passing work to go around on the Cardinals, and I know a lot of people are feeling right now like you never really know which guy it's going to be, but I think what we're seeing is that there's so much volume and so much offense that they're all kind of safe from week to week.
Yeah, I mean, it really has been that. And also, we've seen a less than 100% version of DeAndre Hopkins. So that's been helping the wide receivers
that is
around
true.
him. And now that Chase Edmonds is out for a couple of weeks, they say it's a high ankle sprain, so we can expect a couple of weeks out. We can see how this will impact the wide receivers, especially someone with low depth of target like Rondale Moore, which may take those shallow targets that Chase Edmonds was getting, and we can see another wide receiver involved in the passing game that wasn't in the same level as Kirk and Green. So we might even see 3 or 4 viable fantasy wide receivers out of the Cardinals, which is kind of impressive, honestly.
Love it. Speaking of teams with a variety of different receiving options that are relevant for fantasy football, I want to take one more look at another stat. This is true throw value for quarterbacks. And before I identify this player, do you want to talk a little bit about how you arrive at true throw value for quarterbacks?
Yeah, true throw value is actually the first step what we talked about when talking about true target value, where we look at how, on average, what type of throws a quarterback is throwing and how much are those throws worth in terms of fantasy points. So if it's a team that when they get to the red zone, they just run a lot, those quarterbacks' throws are going to be less valuable because he's not getting the touchdowns. Or if it's a team that throws a lot to the middle or a lot to the outside, that's going to play into how much the quarterback's throws are worth, and in addition to their actual talents and how good they are at completing those throws, etc. So it's just an average, a situational average, if you will, a weighted average of their throws and how much each of them is worth.
Yeah, in hindsight, as soon as I heard you talk about how you calculate true target values, I was like, oh, I totally should have started with true throw value and then worked my way over to targets.
That was the way to go.
That's okay. When I put out this highlight clip on YouTube, I'll just reverse it because that's the magic of post-production. So the top two on the true throw value list right now, Russell Wilson and Matthew Stafford. Off the top of your head, can you guess the third? I know this is your tool, but I'm sure you don't study the outcome every week. And I don't mean to put you on the
true throw value in a long time, but if I know someone that was up there for a while, and I don't know if he's still up there. So I'm just gonna guess. I don't know if this is a product of small sample size, but Tyrod Taylor was up there for a while. I don't know if he's still third.
It is not Taylor. I don't even see him top 10 anymore. So it looks like he took a pretty steep dive. But good strategy guessing somebody unexpected. It is not somebody that unexpected, but certainly probably not someone in your top few guesses. It's Joe Burrow sitting at number 3 right now. What do you make of that?
I make of that he has higher than average middle of the field throw because of all the long touchdowns that T. Higgins has housed. So if you compare his middle of the field throw to the average middle of the field throw, it's not going to be the same because middle of the field throw, I don't know, I'm just going to guess 30% of his middle of the field throws to T. Higgins have gone for a touchdown. That's insane. That's absolutely crazy output. So that's probably putting him higher than most. I don't think it's totally unexpected. I think he's been a very solid QB, but top 3 may be a little bit steep.
Yeah, he's definitely taken a big step forward this year, and he is carrying plenty of fantasy relevant offensive weapons with him on that team. You love to see it. And I call him out not because I don't think that he's a good quarterback or even a good fantasy quarterback, but when you're up there with Russell Wilson and Matt Stafford, and behind him is Dak Prescott, Tom Brady, Kyler Murray, one of those names really jumped out, so I thought it was worth talking about. But just a really fascinating set of stats and tools that will, if nothing else, make you sit down and point out the things that don't seem like they belong. And when you find those outliers, that is really your opportunity to take action. Am I right? And get ahead of the trends. Yeah.
Yes. That's exactly what fantasy's about. You're just analyzing the trends and what sticks out and taking advantage of it.
Amen, dude. And it's a ton of fun. So do you want to take one more second before we get back to the mailbag just to let people know where to find this app and how they can download and use it?
Sure. You can find it actually Google Play Store, App Store, anywhere you find apps. It's Fantasy Football by BRoto. If you go to my Twitter, which is @BRoto, BRotoFF Casanova, it's on the screen. You can find a link to it in my bio, so it's very easy. Whether you have Android, iPhone, doesn't matter. You can just click on it, and it'll direct you to the App Store. It's completely free, 100% free. All the features, you just have to just give us your name and whatever, and it's completely 100% free to use.
There you have it, folks. Download it, enjoy, and shoot Santiago a tweet to thank him once it helps you win your league this year.
Hey, so, hopefully,
yeah, fingers crossed, man. With that said, we're going to get back to our mailbag. Again, this is at fantasyfanline.com. You can write in anytime during the week if you can't join us live. If you can join us live and you're watching this show right now, you can call us 618-FANLINE to get on the air with us. In the meantime, Ken from Texas wants to know, Darrell Williams or Brandon Bolden this week if Harris and Stevenson are both out from, like I said, Ken in Texas. So Bolden right now looking like the only show in town for running backs in New England, potentially. What do you make of this?
I mean, I like that because the problem with backfields like New England historically is that they have many guys that they like to use and they rotate, so you never know who's going to get the bulk of the work. If we get a situation where some are sidelined by injury and have a pretty clear cut or more principal guy in the backfield, I really want to play him. And from the looks of it, I think Stevenson is trending to be out, and I'm not sure about Harris. But I'm definitely interested about Brandon Bolden, especially because he's been getting the passing work. So it's not Damien Harris, who has been almost exclusively rushing in that backfield alone. You have a guy that has been getting rushing and receiving work, which is exactly what you want for fantasy.
Yeah, last I saw was that both Harris and Stevenson didn't practice Thursday. I'm not sure about Friday, but I assume they probably did not practice again, or I would have heard something. The Patriots have Cleveland this week. Kansas City is going to Las Vegas. Both not great matchups. I think Darrell Williams is going a little bit underrated in terms of his usage as a receiver out of the backfield, which I think is interesting because they didn't really use Clyde Edwards-Helaire that much, and he had a good rep coming out of college as being a pass-catching running back. But Williams has at least 3 catches in his past 5 straight, and he has been okay as a runner. Derek Gore was not really a factor in Week 9 after kind of a scare in Week 8 with 11 carries and a touchdown. So I think Williams is probably the safer play. But if I'm looking for upside, I would probably go Bolden if the rest of that backfield is empty. He's been really efficient as a runner in limited opportunities. Hasn't gotten a ton of work, but is doing a lot with it. And I'm sure the numbers in your app would support that. So kind of depends on your matchup here. If you are projected with a good lead, I would probably go with Williams just because he's less likely to completely disappear and sink your team on the week. But if it's closer or you need to kind of come from behind, roll out Bolden, hope for some explosions because they're capable of it in that backfield.
Absolutely. That's my favorite way to look at star decision too. Like, do you need floor? Do you need ceiling? That's the way I look at them. That's the way I tell people to look at them. And it's a perfect explanation of the situation too. I like it.
Glad we're on the same page, man. Great minds think alike. Me and all those applied math geniuses out there.
There you go.
Samantha from New York wants to know, do I flex Dearness Johnson or Jerry Jeudy this week? This one's a little easier for me, but I'll get your opinion first.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming this question was asked when we didn't know Nick Chubb was confirmed out. Now that we do, I'm definitely flexing Dearness Johnson. I think he has RB1 potential. I've seen him projected as an RB4, and I think I'm like the RB4.
Oh, I was going to say.
Yeah. That's a little bit steep for me and setting yourself up for failure. But I think RB11, RB12 is not out of the question, and that's definitely a very good flex to have. And Jerry Jeudy is a good player, but does not have the same upside as Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, Chubb was, diagnosed with COVID earlier in the week, and there was a chance that he might clear protocol and play this Sunday. He was ruled out definitively, I think yesterday. So Johnson is the guy in Cleveland this week. And last time we saw that happen was Week 7 versus Denver, when Chubb and Hub were both out. Johnson carried for 22 times for 146 yards and a touchdown, 2 catches for 22 yards. He put up 24 fantasy points. So not saying that's going to happen again, but it is in the realm of possibility. And Cleveland's a great running team. And if he's the lead guy there, he's going to get every opportunity to do that again, I think.
Something that's worth noting is that the Browns have 5 running backs on their roster. 4 are officially out for Sunday. So
seems impossible.
Yeah, I mean, Kareem Hunt's not coming back from IR. Felton and Chubb have COVID, and then there's another guy that just was never expected to play and is injured as well. So it's just the Dearness Johnson and Andy Yanovich show this week. They'll literally get every opportunity.
I don't know why Dearness Johnson wasn't in the running back room when I guess they broke a mirror or something and just cursed themselves.
That's perfect. He took every precaution and just made it out.
Yeah, whatever running back party they all went to when they caught COVID and broke all their bones and stuff, he skipped it. He had something else to do that. He had a date, and
good for him.
Yeah, I think he's going to reap the benefits. Jerry Jeudy, I'm in on the talent. The situation's just not it's not happening. He's got 10 catches for just over 100 yards in the past 2 games combined since coming back from injury. He's seeing a target on 25% of his routes this year, which is the highest on the team. Eventually, he's going to do something with them, but I don't know, man. What do you think of the Jerry Jeudy situation in Denver with Cortland Sutton and the resurgence of the great Tim Patrick?
Yeah, it's interesting. I really do like the talent. Even coming out of college, I thought he was the number 2 receiver of that class, and he has proven me right in that regard. But it also comes back to what we talked about through throw value and through target value. Teddy Bridgewater is not great when it comes to giving high value targets. And especially now that there's a bit of a competition and there's no clear alpha, or if you can consider a clear alpha, it's definitely not Jeudy. This is not what you want to see in terms of fantasy. So it's not someone I can start confidently in my wide receiver spot or my flex spot. We just have to wait for talent to rise to the top. Right now, that's not happening. So just hold on tight and wait for the right opportunity, I think.
Yeah. Teddy Two Gloves, great nickname. Not a great enough passer, I think, for us to be flexing Jerry Jeudy over Dearness Johnson when he's got the show to himself. Adrian in South Carolina wants to know, should I trade Tyreek and AP for Najee Harris? This is a big one.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one, I have to say. And I lean no. I want to keep Tyreek on my team. I want to have that extreme upside top number one wide receiver in fantasy potential. We haven't seen that from him this year because Patrick Mahomes seems to be a little bit broken. But if he can
Well
get back
said.
to normal, Tyreek still has all that potential. AP is nothing more than a wide receiver three. I'm sorry, running back three with running back two weekly potential if he catches a touchdown or just bouncing in for a touchdown. Najee Harris is an interesting choice because he's been getting a ton of volume, but we've seen his target totals decline in the past weeks, and I've seen someone compare it to the emergence of Pat Freiermuth, where if you see the Pat Freiermuth target totals and the Najee Harris target totals, are just one going up, one going down, and I think that is slightly significant, especially for fantasy, and I don't want someone as inefficient as Najee Harris, even though he gets all the volume, when I can have Tyreek Hill in my roster. He's still a good fantasy player, Najee is, but it's not someone I'm trying actively to acquire.
Yeah, I totally understand the question.
Sure.
And I think that
it's not easy.
Yeah, in a vacuum, I side with you that I would not trade away Tyreek and AP in this situation. Harris has been great. He's the RB6 so far in points per game on the season. And, per the BRoto fantasy app, he is the top rated RB1 in consistency metrics, I think 7 weeks on the year. So he's been great and he's doing it consistently. But, man, that is an expensive price to pay. Position scarcity, is a factor. It is much harder, I think, to come by elite running backs than elite wide receivers. Yes. So if you're in a situation where your wide receivers are stacked, I mean, I'm sure you drafted Tyreek Hill as your one, but if you got lucky on some, kind of mid to late round guys who have stepped up, maybe you scored with Deebo Samuel or, hoping for Mike Williams to kind of get back to form, and you have enough depth, and you really, got unlucky with the injury bug on running backs, this is not a deal that you have to avoid if it's going to improve your team and help you win. But if you're in a vacuum where you're like, okay, I don't have any specific positional needs, I'm good at running back, I'm good at wide receiver, I'm just looking to boost the value of my team, I would stay away from this one.
Absolutely agree. All trades are situational. If you're looking at each individual player value, the Tyreek side is more valuable in my opinion. But if your team is in dire need of a running back, and like you said, you have maybe Cooper Kupp that you drafted late, or Deebo Samuel, a combination of many decent wide receivers, this is not a terrible trade by any means. I just said, like thinking about in a vacuum, I'd rather have Tyreek in the future.
Yeah, I mean, Tyreek Hill, despite the perception of the Chiefs' offense dropping off this year, which they have, he's been very boomer bust, but he's still a wide receiver 3 on the year, which surprised me when I looked it up. Yep. Just because it doesn't feel that way, but he's still producing. He's still winning you weeks occasionally, and there's still a world where AP is very usable. I mean, he's 1 game into his Titans career right now. He used that game to go 10 for 21 and a touchdown, so not what you like to see, but he's, one of the all-time greats. He was once. He's 36 now, but he's fresh legs is a thing, man. There's a chance he gets up to speed, and just the work ethic and the physical kind of freak that he is. There's still a world where he is used effectively in that offense that produced, the rushing title holder like the last few years straight. So he's not Derrick Henry, but he was once. Not. AP was a world beater. And if those of you who are listening to this who are newer to fantasy and just started playing, AP was the dude for a while, not that long ago. So, this isn't Frank Gore coming back at age 48 or whatever he is now. This is this is a guy coming in midway through the season on a run-heavy offense. So I would sit tight on this if you can afford to do so, Adrian. Good question, though. All right, we got one more mailbag question we'll get to here. Then we got about 10 minutes left on the show. We're going to leave the phone lines open, 618 Fanline, if anybody wants to hop in. In the meantime, Drew in Tennessee is wondering, Jalen Hurts or Carson Wentz rest of the way? Interesting question given recent trends. I know why it's being asked. Yeah. What do you think?
I absolutely get where this is coming from. We've seen Carson Wentz sort of with all the resurgence and with Michael Pittman, both working very nice, and then even passing to Jonathan Taylor. But the thing that Jalen Hurts has that is so important for fantasy is the rushing upside or rushing floor that he gets. You sometimes are watching an Eagles game and you see Jalen Hurts play and you think to yourself, he's having a terrible game by all accounts. Then you check for fantasy, and he is a QB1 cemented into the top 8, top 7, because he gets these magical rushing points, maybe just accumulating yards, a touchdown here and there. And that's incredibly valuable for fantasy and someone you want to have week in, week out. Regardless of the matchup, he's going to get you these magical out of nowhere points. And that's what I want.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts, man, I can't think of anybody more stressful to roster in your team this year. And hopefully you have learned to sit back and trust the system and just roll him out every week. I roster him and start him in a league that I play in with our guest who came on the show last week, Sanchi Value. And there was a few weeks into the season, there was a week where Hurts was going into the last quarter of the game with like 3 fantasy points. And he messaged our league. He was like, Greg, are you worried? And I was like, no, because he's going to do nothing until the last 5 minutes of the game. And all of a sudden he's going to have 28 fantasy points. And that's exactly what happened. And it was no problem. But, if you're playing Hurts, you just got to not watch the games and just check in with the box score afterwards and you'll be fine. It's a really interesting question because I think they really have opposite trajectories. Hurts has been consistently great most of the season. Really all year until a couple of weeks ago when he failed to crack 20 fantasy points for the first time.
And it's worth noting that game is one that they won 44-6. So it's not like he had a terrible game where the Eagles just didn't do anything. They were just dominating so much that he didn't have to do much. So
the game where he played the best on the field really was the week where he dropped off. Yeah. That was the only week of the season when he wasn't top 12 at the position. And that was against the Lions in week 8 is the game you're referencing. Conversely, Carson Wentz was okay most of the year, but kind of crossed paths with Hurts on his way down, and it has been putting up 20-plus points in 4 of his last 5 and the last 3 straight. So he's been on fire. They both have a bye week ahead in week 14. I lean with you, and I'm still going to go Jalen Hurts just because of the rushing. Certainly not as a vote of confidence for him as a passer or for his pass-catching weapons as opposed to the Colts. The system is just broken in terms of scoring for rushing fantasy quarterbacks. It is not my place to say whether or not it should be scored differently, but as long as it's being scored this way, you got to lean into it and take advantage of it.
Oh, absolutely. I think the standard quote-unquote fantasy scoring rules are flawed, and we need sort of a reform, but that's a different topic.
Where do you like Carson Wentz the rest of the way? Has he climbed into kind of the back end quarterback 1 rankings?
I think so. Yeah. I haven't looked at it. Just I don't usually do rest of season rankings. Maybe I should. Yeah. He's definitely not one of the elites, but with his recent results, he's definitely into the quarterback 1 consideration, in my opinion.
I guess let me put it this way: is he not somebody anymore who you are thinking about starting conditionally based on matchup? I mean, certainly you're going to sit him probably against the best of the best defenses, but I think that there's definitely a category of guys that you start and don't worry about, and there's a category of guys who you look at and you think about, but there's maybe a Trevor Lawrence I grab in the right matchup and plug him in if he's going against like the Jets or something,
Yeah, he's definitely not matchup proof like someone like Jalen Hurts is, who faced I think one of the toughest defenses last week and still produced at a very good level. Carson Wentz is not at that level where he's matchup proof, but you do consider him for most matchups, I think. So that's his value right now.
Yeah, agreed. Good question, Drew. Hope this is helpful to you and everybody else probably wondering the same thing. Let's take a few minutes and talk through some recent news that came in as recently as today, but we'll start with something a little bit older. Odell Beckham Jr. signs with the Rams. The rich get richer for a minute until they get poorer today, and we'll talk about that too. But what do you think? Well, as long as we're talking about this, we might as well also discuss Robert Woods tears his ACL in Friday's practice. Are you kidding me?
It just feels scripted, man.
It really, I was about to say, you could not make this stuff up and sound more ridiculous. And I got this notification an hour before the show, and all I saw was the first line, Robert Woods tears his ACL out for season. And I looked at my calendar. I was like, doing what? Was there a game today that I was not aware of, but it turns out it was in yesterday's practice. I guess they just confirmed it. What does
Yeah.
it all mean, Santiago? Help us.
I had my answer prepared for this question without the Robert Woods news. I was just gonna talk about how Van Jefferson is gonna take it the fall and whatever. But let's talk about the real stuff here.
Yeah.
Odell Beckham is in the best position he's been in years. He is walking into an offense as, I think, a still very talented wide receiver who may demand his fair share of target share, and as a clear number 2 option in the passing game for a very good quarterback who we saw as number 2 in true throw value. That is as good as it gets, and I'm jumping into consideration for OBJ as a wide receiver 2 rest of season. Whether I get proven right or wrong is yet to be determined because there's a lot of questions about OBJ. I don't think this affects Cooper Kupp too much. I do like the value it gets for OBJ. It's just immense. And Van Jefferson, I think, might retain the same role he had all along. So he comes out of the situation unscathed, probably, in my opinion.
You know, I've been seeing a lot of people joking on Twitter that OBJ went in and sabotaged Robert Woods.
Yeah.
But since you put it this way, it occurs to me that maybe the real guy with the motive and the opportunity here is Van Jefferson. They pull off the Scooby-Doo mask at the end, and it's Van Jefferson under there trying to retain his wide receiver 3 role. And I don't blame him because, that's an offense that rolls out a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. And until a couple hours ago, Van Jefferson was out of that equation. He's back, baby. And, there's, like you said, you can't really make any guarantees about OBJ's level of play. It has been a minute since we've seen him be relevant, but he's going to have every opportunity now as the 2 in that offense with Matthew Stafford. So if it's ever going to happen again for OBJ, this is how and when it happens.
Absolutely. It's make or break for him. Absolutely.
Yeah, we had an interesting discussion a few weeks ago. Somebody wrote in and asked if we thought that OBJ was going to be a Hall of Famer someday when he retires. And it was an easy no for me at the time. I thought he was a Hall of Fame level talent who didn't have a Hall of Fame career. It is not impossible that he changes my mind in the next couple of years. I'm not projecting that, but in Cleveland, I would have said there's no way. In Los Angeles, there is a way. So,
yep, absolutely, I agree with that. Just the way you put it, like he has Hall of Fame level talent, but he hasn't had Hall of Fame level production is absolutely right, and I stand with you 100% on that.
Breaking news, by the way, the Patriots have just ruled out running back Damian Harris with a concussion. So,
okay. So Brandon Bolden becomes very, very interesting in my opinion.
He seems to be the guy. I don't know if they've for sure ruled out Ramondre Stevenson. I haven't seen anything on that, but if they don't, I mean, you feel any differently about Stevenson than you do about Bolden? Is he a...
Yes, because I think Bolden has been getting most of that passing work. Let me just confirm. And I'm not talking about things. Yeah, Brandon Bolden has had 11% target share week 9. He had 5%. Oh, actually had 0% week 8. So it's still a mess, that backfield. It's no 2 ways to look about it. But
yeah, Bolden definitely has the narrative of being the pass catching running back, but I'm not sure the numbers always support that.
No, he did get a lot of targets last week, which is more of a recency bias thing from people. But he has been very inconsistent, like we've come to expect from Patriots running backs. So if Stevenson is out, I'm definitely firing up Bolden. If not, then I'll give Darrell Williams some consideration for sure.
Okay, good to know. Cam Newton and the Carolina Panthers agree to terms. Cam is back. Dude, the jokes on Twitter have been killing me with people photoshopping him into a Panthers jersey.
Yeah.
It's so good. What does it mean for Cam? What does it mean for his receiving options and McCaffrey, if anything?
McCaffrey, I think, is in a good spot because we've seen that offense in the past, and I like what I've seen from that offense. And Cam Newton, I think, becomes a very relevant option in fantasy because he was better than people want to give him credit for when he was with the Patriots. So now if you're bringing him back with weapons that he already knows, and he has that rushing upside that we've come to know, not as dramatic as Jalen Hurts because Jalen Hurts is in another planet, but Cam Newton also has the talents to be a very safe quarterback in terms of fantasy because he gets the rushing that gives you those magical points. He doesn't have to be the best passer. So I think he comes in and produces at a high-end QB2 level the rest of the season. I like him. I like it for him.
Yep, I agree with that take. Cam's another guy who not that long ago was just a complete monster in fantasy football. For years, he was the top 5 guy. And he was another guy who you watch him on the field as a passer, and you're like, I don't get it. And then you look at the box score, and the numbers were there. It was rushing touchdowns, it was scrambles, it was design runs, and he finds a way each and every week, it seems like, to produce, or at least he did for a long time in Carolina. He's back there now with DJ Moore, a receiver who he knows well from his last stay in Carolina. I like it. I think Cam is a useful guy. I would give it a week or two, maybe just to kind of, I don't know if you have that long. I mean, depending on the timetable there. But
I mean, he's not even starting this week, so it's a little bit of a setback, and you'll have to wait. But if you have a bench spot to spare, I would definitely try to roster Cam and see if he helps you for fantasy playoffs. He could be that X factor for your team.
Yeah, especially in 2 quarterback leagues. I mean, by now, if you're listening to this and you don't already have him, it's probably too late to grab him in those leagues. But he might still be out there in 1 QB league. So if you have a guy who you've been struggling with in that position, if you have like a Matt Ryan maybe, who just lost Calvin Ridley, he's looked better lately. Matt Ryan has, but I don't really know. And the one game they played without Ridley was such a weird game that I don't know what to make of that offense moving forward. I think I would probably stash a Cam Newton and maybe think about how I want to play them moving forward.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so we have a couple more items to hit here. We're just over an hour. You cool for another few minutes if we hang out and talk some news?
Yeah, for sure.
Let's do it. We already discussed Nick Chubb being ruled out Sunday, so we'll skip that one and go to Alvin Kamara, who was also ruled out Sunday with a knee injury. Mark Ingram, suddenly the guy in New Orleans.
Yeah, once again.
Yeah. What year is it right now? Cam Newton going to Carolina, Ingram starting for the Saints.
Crazy.
How do you feel about old Mark Ingram?
I like it, honestly.
Yeah.
I really do like it. We've seen that Kamara is not the best pure rushing running back. He gets a lot of things done in the passing game. Ingram, on the other hand, is very good at rushing, and we've seen it just in this past week when he played with the Saints. And the coaching staff liked him too, so they gave him a 37.5% rushing share already with Kamara in the mix. So without Kamara, he just becomes the main guy in that backfield. We've seen him produce in the past, and of course he's older now. But whenever you have a guy that's going to be the feature back in an offense, that's someone you want to start, because volume leads to points most of the time. So you want to sort of chase that volume, that promise of volume to get solid production. It's different from wide receivers where they could get targets and no points because they don't catch them. Mm-hmm. Running backs, they usually get more catchable targets and guaranteed touches from carries. So it's when you have a running back in this situation, you most likely flex him to some degree.
Yeah, he's always been an underrated runner, I think, and pass catcher, mind you. He's pretty good out of the backfield as a receiver. He's on a team with a great defense. They're playing the Titans this week. The rest of that offense is Trevor Siemian throwing to nobody. So if it's not Ingram, I don't know how they're going to win that game. So, I think that's how they're going to score points in that game. They're going to keep away from the Titans' high-powered offense. They're going to try to keep the ball on the ground, keep the ball out of the hands of Ryan Tannehill and the fearsome Adrian Peterson. That's what I would do anyway if I were the Saints. So, but I'm not. So we'll see what happens.
We'll definitely see Sean Payton, what ideas he has.
Yeah, I'd be making a lot more money in that job than this one, but at least I get to work in my basement. So, we already talked about Robert Woods tearing his ACL. I just brought it up again, I guess, to reinforce the pain on all of his managers. I'm so sorry. I think that's the end of our major news. So, Santiago, man, this has been so much fun. I'm glad we got to do this, and I hope we get to do it again later in the season.
Absolutely.
I'm going to take one more opportunity here to plug everything you've got going on, the app as well as the podcast, and talk a little bit about, I guess, the rest of BRoto. We didn't even mention the bros who consisted that team with you, I don't think. You want to talk a little bit about who they are and what the company as a whole is about and everything that you guys offer to your listeners and readers, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. The brothers that gave BRoto its name.
It took me weeks to put that together, by the way. I'm so ashamed to say that.
Yeah, it's difficult. Sometimes people don't read it as BRoto. They say BRoto and that gets lost.
That was me until I started listening to the podcast.
There you go.
then it became immediately clear.
Yeah, that's the barrier that gives it. But yeah, they're brothers. It's three brothers, Mike, Jason, and Tim, who founded BRoto a couple years ago. I started listening to them as a fan, just getting my feet wet into fantasy, and I loved it. And I kept listening. Then a couple years ago, I started contributing. We brought in, at the same time as me, 3 or 4 writers, I believe. Then this offseason is when we really grew. We have a very large team of writers and content creators all around. We have different shows. We created the app. So what we offer in general is weekly podcast. Well, 2 weekly podcasts, actually. We have the preview and the review, when we talk about things coming up in the week and then the things that happen on Mondays. That's the podcast side. And then we have the app, where we have many articles like sleepers and busts, or buy low, sell high currently. Well, it comes out weekly for every position. And then we have all the tools in the app and different articles like DFS, quick hits, DFS tips, and everything. We also have a Patreon. So if you are so compelled to do so, it's BRoto Fantasy on Patreon, and we have exclusive perks like Discord for our patrons. And we have a DFS optimizer that I developed. Then we give the optimizer picks to the patrons, as well as some Vegas picks of a model, an algorithm I developed to get the edge on spreads and money lines. So that's just basically it. Everything, you can find it in the app, the podcast, the articles, the stats. It's, like we said, the one-stop shop. It's Fantasy Football by BRoto, App Store, Google Play Store, anything. On Twitter, we're at BRoto Fantasy. And you can find me at BRotoFF Casanova, and I think that covers it.
Santiago, it is genuinely incredible how much content you guys put out and how many resources and tools you provide to the players. So thank you on behalf of the community. I don't know how you guys find the time to do it, but
Me neither.
It is invaluable, truly a diamond in the rough discovery. Thanks again to that person on Reddit who connected me with you guys.
Yeah, you'll have to let me know who it was. Now I'm very curious.
I'm gonna go back and look it up, and I'm gonna shoot you a screenshot of it, and
Awesome.
maybe we can track them down from there. Dude, thanks again for coming on the show. This was great. I'm sure we'll have you on again later in the season, maybe with some of the bros, and we'll make a group show of it. So,
Awesome.
thanks again to Santiago Casanova, BRoto Fantasy Football. We'll be live every Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time for the rest of the season. We're back next weekend with Bob Lung from Big Guy Fantasy Sports for another great episode. Yeah, man, I'm as excited as you are.
That's very cool.
You can subscribe to and stream Fantasy Fanline live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch, or find us the next day on your favorite podcast platform. You can follow us everywhere at Fantasy Fanline and visit our website, fantasyfanline.com, for a full schedule of our upcoming guests and to submit a question to our mailbag if you can't join us live. If you like the show, please leave a review, tell a friend, help us grow. We also have a Patreon, patreon.com/fantasyfanline, where you can go to support us and earn perks to help us keep the phone lines open. Thank you again for tuning in, and we will talk to you next time on Fantasy Fanline. Goodbye, everybody.